stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast. Rise up, rise up, rise up, rise up. Who is able to make war with him?
From the information sphere to the military. If there is any careless word or movement, an open-armed confrontation may begin, up to and including the use of nuclear weapons, I say.
Dlaczego mogę siedzieć w ciepłym pomieszczeniu, na wygodnym fotelu, obżerać się tłustymi chipsami i enjoyować ten pokazuję i objaśniam piękny widok. Tak nie wygląda wielki ucisk. Tak w ogóle ucisk nie wygląda. Ok? Tak w ogóle ucisk nie wygląda. Tak w ogóle ucisk nie wygląda.
You have heard more than once that the military political situation in the region, but also in the world as a whole, is assessed by political experts as a crisis with preconditions for transition to a phase of global conflict. Today we will talk about what forces and means are used to intensify threats to our national security. The main real risk is posed by a hot spot in the region, of course, Ukraine. Washington is doing everything to drag our country into the conflict in order to launch a mechanism for drawing in other states, that is, to weaken the Western and Eastern European regions. As for Ukraine, you know a lot about it. And I have addressed this issue more than once. However, I will say two words about the situation at the front today. Heavy fighting is going on. Unfortunately, people are dying. And these are no longer just a few, tens or hundreds, but thousands of people. The Ukrainian troops have a serious shortage of not only ammunition, which everyone talked a lot about. They were very worried, as I say, about the allocation of $60 billion for this war. Then I warned you that they will receive the money. This is natural. Because not giving this money is missing the opportunity to humiliate us in Russia and weaken us. Therefore, they will supply ammunition, missiles and so on. I will talk about this later. But they don't have enough people. People are fleeing the war. These are not stupid people. These are our people. They are wise. The allocation of $60 billion for the war by the United States of America is the most important factor in the escalation of the conflict in Ukraine. And it is very dangerous that long-range ATACMS missiles were allocated. UAV strikes on the Russian Federation, you know. There were strikes on oil refineries and airfields. Influential people of Ukraine who are put on the counter, as the bandits say. All this is not only their plans, but also the actions of Ukrainians, which indicate that an escalation of the war is taking place. At the same time, the army of the Russian Federation is equipped with new weapons. There are reserves in every brigade. At the last negotiations in the Kremlin, when we held them with Vladimir Putin, he invited the leadership of the general staff and law enforcement agencies. And the two of us simply listened to information about what was happening at the front. And I was very convinced and partly surprised by the information that the chief of the Russian general staff reported that they had created significant reserves in manpower and equipment. Today, at the front, every Russian brigade, there are many of them, has reserves of at least a regiment. That is, if there is a brigade at the front, then in the rear it will have a regiment deployed, armed with the most modern weapons. As for the front itself, There are very serious battles going on. As I said, Russia is slowly, 500 meters at a time, 1 kilometer at a time, 2 to 3 kilometers at a time, in different areas, in different ways. But every day, Russia is moving forward every day. You know information about the liberation of some settlements by Russian troops. But this is very slow progress. As our people say, a kind of zugzwang has formed. Neither Ukrainians nor Russians, yes, there is movement, but it is an insignificant movement that I would like to have. This is a stalemate. In this situation, as I understand it, and I always suggest, what should be done? Now is the most serious situation. More than ever during this war. And a convenient, so to speak, situation for peace. For concluding a peace treaty. When I was in Moscow, I expressed my position to journalists when they asked me how to act. But to start interrupted negotiations, they always need to start somewhere. We could start with the Istanbul agreements, which President Putin often talks about. After they were worked out in Istanbul, he handed them over to me. I looked again. These are quite normal agreements. This does not mean that as a result of the negotiations these agreements initialed by the parties will be accepted or even become the basis of a peace treaty. No. But you can start with them and move forward, of course. This will not be a peace treaty. These will not be copies of these agreements. The peace treaty will be different, but this is where we can start. They agreed on this. They worked on solutions for a long time. We had 3 rounds. And in Istanbul there was 1 round of negotiations. That's what they came to. I already said yesterday that all the military heads of Western intelligence services, politicians, heads of state are already publicly saying that Putin's victory cannot be allowed. Well, if you insist on this, that this is impossible, then the time has come for negotiations. As I say, draw at this point. There is no need to put forward radical solutions, like Vladimir Zelensky's formula, well, it seems to be patriotic, and so on, but it is unreal. It's unreal today. Russians today will not leave either Crimea or the eastern regions, as they call it, Novorossiya. They won't leave. And you know why. Therefore, if proposals that are unacceptable for negotiations are put forward, this means that the party that puts forward them is not ready to negotiate. I know the mood of the Ukrainian military. They are already tired of this war. But they cannot take independent actions because behind President Zelensky, who wants to fight to the last Ukrainian, are entire NATO troops, the entire Western European bloc and the United States of America. This is a very serious situation. But, in my opinion, if we do not negotiate now, then Ukraine will lose its statehood over time. And it may cease to exist. Therefore, I know that after these conversations of mine there will be a noise again in Ukraine. Various bloggers and journalists will start hammering me through all these channels. But I'm already used to it. I express my position. This is my position, and if you agree with it, then I ask you to proceed from the fact that Ukraine needs peace today. Evidence of this is the flight of more or less healthy, sane Ukrainians from the country in order to avoid going to the front. We know very well that military commissars grab them on the streets, and often they don't even train them. They don't conduct combat coordination at military training grounds. They throw them straight to the front, and not in the second echelon, but as attack aircraft. And behind them there are barrage detachments. Detachments of armed Ukrainians who follow these poor fellows, as they often say, and I quote, "They gave us a one-way ticket." We know what they are talking about at the front. We have a serious position there. Nobody wants to fight today. So we must move towards peace. But the Americans managed to form an image of the enemy in the person of Moscow and Minsk. Washington is steadily pushing aggressive narratives towards the Belarusian and Russian states. increasing the degree of hostility of the NATO bloc in our direction. With the expansion of the North Atlantic Alliance, which included Finland and Sweden, Washington and Brussels continue to form a belt of unfriendly states around the Russian Federation. Next in line is the entry of other European countries into the alliance. Their goal is known. According to their plan, everything on this line should be on fire. I once again ask you to pay attention to my thesis expressed yesterday. People always have a question. Well, what do these Westerners and Americans want? I repeat once again. They simply want to drown Russia in war, to tear it away from the emerging alliance with China. This union does not exist yet, but it is emerging. Circumstances have developed in such a way that both Russia and China need to be together. The Americans have realized this, so they need to drive a wedge. Well, that's right. How to drown them? With the help of Ukraine. Therefore, $60 billion is not enough money for them to have Russians and Ukrainians fight each other. But yesterday I didn't finish. I want to keep one more thing in mind. For Americans, China and Russia are not all adversaries and enemies. For America itself, we felt this during the time of Trump. A very serious rival is Europe itself. The European Union, especially since then. When Europe dared as an alternative to the dollar, it became insolent. And it introduced a euro. This is a strong currency. Therefore, Americans do not need any opponents or competitors. Therefore, having drowned Russia in a war with Ukraine, burdening the European Union with this war, the Americans want the Europeans to shell out 2 to 3% of GDP so that they produce more weapons and ammunition, and so that they send their people against Russia to the front. I want you to understand that NATO mercenaries have been fighting there for a long time. This is just for your information. A month ago, the Russians dealt a serious blow to militant positions on Ukrainian territory. Dozens of Poles died. Have you heard anything about this? Several dozen Poles died, not just one, not two, not three people. They came under fire from the Russian Federation. Coffins and corpses were exported to Poland. Why didn't the Polish government inform the Polish population about this? Therefore, the Americans want to catch several birds with one stone. To weaken Russia, overload Europe, and to weaken it as well. Well, there, in the Pacific Ocean, as I said, deal one-on-one with China, involving India first of all in this fight. England is already there, Australia, God forbid Ukraine and South Korea, against China. But we need to understand that the situation requires the strictest control in all areas, from the information sphere to the military. If there is any careless word or movement, an open armed confrontation may begin, up to and including the use of nuclear weapons. I say that there was a supply of long-range missiles to Ukraine without conditions. Previously, they supplied and publicly stated that they prohibited the Ukrainians from striking the territory of Russia and partly Belarus. And now they are supplying ATACMS and others with long-range ammunition without conditions. And if the situation becomes threatening, first of all they want this for the internal situation in Russia. Then Russia will use the entire arsenal that it has. It will be an apocalypse. Everything is ready for this, of course. At the instigation of the United States, NATO persistently declares the need for intensive militarization of Europe, and we are not talking about protection, about repelling some kind of aggression, so that you understand. They place emphasis on building up the strike and offensive potential. 18 alliance states, including Poland and the Baltic countries, intend to increase military spending to a level above 2% of GDP this year. The Polish leadership proposes 3% of GDP, and in some countries today, more than 3% of GDP is spent on weapons. The total volume of defense spending by NATO countries this year will amount to approximately €1,200 billion for the first time in the history of the bloc. €1,200 billion. In addition, Brussels decided to increase the number of immediate reaction forces to 300,000 people. Currently there are 80,000. Transform NATO's Baltic air policing mission into a military operation and reorganize the battle groups deployed in Poland and the Baltic states into brigade-level formations. You remember that they constantly reproached us for placing nuclear weapons on the territory of Belarus. This means that they will allegedly be subjected to the first strike if a clash occurs. And Poland and the Baltic states themselves generally gave up their territories in order to completely militarize them and create strongholds there for an attack in the east. In this context, it is worth noting the beginning of the practical implementation of the German-Lithuanian agreement, which provides for the strengthening of the German military presence in Lithuania. Such data has already appeared in the media. On April 8, a task force of the German armed forces was redeployed to Vilnius. Its tasks include studying the area where the contingent will be deployed and resolving issues of preparation for the formation of a brigade headquarters, which is planned to be completed by the end of the year. Site survey, guidance and filling. Let me remind you that the formation of a brigade level of the armed forces of the Federal Republic of Germany will be deployed on the territory of Lithuania until 2028. As I said, apparently the Germans did not understand anything. As well as NATO forces and assets currently stationed on Lithuanian territory in the village of Rukla. As part of the NATO Combined Forces Operation Enhanced Forward Presence, the number of this unit will be about 5,000 people. I will repeat, over 64,000 US military forces. This is almost the same as in the Belarusian army, as well as more than 33,000 NATO soldiers are permanently stationed in Europe. What are they doing here? What kind of America are they defending here? Up to 20,000 of them are concentrated in Poland, close to our borders, and in the Baltic countries. These troop groups are equipped with modern strike weapons, and they are capable of delivering high-precision strikes against targets on the territory of Belarus and the western regions. Now they are working on the relevant tasks. They use strategic bomber aircraft of the US Air Force, which regularly fly in the European continental region. For example, 4 American B-1B strategic bombers are stationed in Spain, practicing bombing techniques for nuclear warheads, including on the territory of our country. They are training to use nuclear weapons. This is a response to those who are fighting abroad, especially those who have escaped, who criticize us for placing nuclear weapons in Belarus. So, they are training. Moreover, Washington has significantly stepped up efforts to verify the readiness to use components of the United States nuclear triad. The tactical nuclear weapons stationed on the territory of NATO member states, which I already spoke about yesterday, are being modernized at an accelerated pace. More than 200 munitions, missiles and bombs are stationed at European air bases. There are 20 munitions stationed at Klein Brogel Air Base in Belgium. There are 20 munitions stationed in Buchel. There are 60 posted in Aviano, Italy. There are 30 posted in Gidi, Italy. There are 50 stationed in Incirlik, Turkey. There are 20 munitions stationed at Volkel in the Netherlands. We counted them all last year. The airborne nuclear bombs stored at Volkel Air Base in the Netherlands were replaced with the most modern and more powerful munitions. Now they plan to modernize tactical nuclear weapons in other countries. In the future, the deployment of tactical nuclear weapons on British territory is not excluded. In the second half of the year, The White House plans to deploy multi-role F-35 fighter jets capable of carrying tactical nuclear weapons to the forward air base Lakenheath in the UK. Well, if they don't want escalation, and if they are against the use of nuclear weapons, then why are they doing this? Now I will say a few words about how Washington continues to increase the US strike and offensive capabilities in Europe. In December last year, US missile defense bases were put into operation on Polish territory. We already regard the ability to use Tomahawk cruise missiles deployed on it, capable of hitting targets throughout the entire depth of the territory of Belarus and the European part, as far as the Urals of the Russian Federation, as a real threat to us. If this is a real threat, then we must resist. We record facts of continuous aerial and space reconnaissance in the eastern direction by Western states. Almost the entire available arsenal of NATO countries is involved, from strategic reconnaissance aircraft to unmanned aerial vehicles, as well as the corresponding capabilities of partner countries. You should know that since last year the intensity of reconnaissance aircraft of the joint NATO armed forces has increased several times. On average about 40 to 50 sorties per week. We record them in real time. Since 2019, they have been using Australian Air Force aircraft for radar control of the airspace of Belarus and the western regions of the Russian Federation. What do they want here? All this is happening against a backdrop of high military activity. From year to year, the number of operational and combat training events on the territory of Poland and the Baltic states increases. At the same time, military formations of the armed forces of the United States and other Western countries also take part in most of these military exercises. The current series of joint NATO and US military exercises in the European region, Defender 2024, has become unprecedented in its geographical scope and in the number of forces and assets involved. This is approximately 90,000 people and up to 15,000 pieces of equipment, approximately 300 aircraft and more than 70 ships, mainly in the Baltic. The goals of their events and the nature of the tasks being practiced, which are planned until the end of May, indicate that the West views our region as a potential theater of military operations. They have identified the enemy, Russia and Belarus. We see how, on the other side of our western border, airfields, naval bases, training grounds are being improved at an accelerated pace, and advanced bases are being created for the advanced deployment and storage of equipment, weapons and material. We record this not only thanks to space reconnaissance, but also on the ground. To date, the modernization of 5 airfields, 2 naval bases, and 6 largest training grounds has been completed in Poland and the Baltic countries. In Poland, a logistics and technical support complex has been put into operation. That is, conditions have been created for equipping an armored brigade combat group of the US Army with weapons and material. This is the settlement of Poets, which provides storage for almost 3,000 units of military equipment. As for the combat units of the Polish armed forces on the border with Belarus, which I spoke about yesterday, under the pretext of strengthening security, the military is carrying out reconnaissance and sabotage tasks. And Poland intends to create the most powerful ground forces in Europe, of course, with the help of military technical support from the United States. Warsaw is steadily increasing the size of its armed forces. By 2035 it is planned to increase them to 300,000 people. They currently have just over 194,000 soldiers. I also can't resist commenting. There is no one left to work in this poor Poland. There are problems there, civil problems. What battles do they dream about? Who will provide them? After all, a war requires a powerful economy, and they rely on subsidies from the European Union and assistance from the United States of America. And, in general, why do they need this? Several times I warned and said that we are not going to fight with them. They should not expect any active and aggressive actions against a Polish state and people from the territory of Belarus. We don't need this. An army corps is being formed within the structure of their ground forces, the operational readiness of which will be achieved by September of this year. For non-military people, I will explain what operational readiness means. This means a formed corps that is ready to go into battle even tomorrow, just like at the front. This is full combat readiness for full deployment. This is approximately the same as when we transferred a couple of battalions from Vitebsk, and we are now facing NATO head-on. These are battalions of full operational readiness, ready to leave their deployment sites within 3 hours. 3 hours and we are there. Further, to equip new mechanized formations with them. I will not list them. We will inform you in the media. Modern models of military equipment are arriving. Poland is completing the process of forming territorial defense troops. The command of this type of armed forces reports on achieving full operational readiness. To date, 15 out of 18 brigades and a training center for territorial defense troops have been created. They plan to complete the formation of the remaining 3 formations this year. While re-equipping its armed forces, Poland is focusing on purchasing modern combat aircraft from around the world, the most advanced aircraft, mainly from the USA and Korea. We also heard about this: unmanned aerial vehicles, armored vehicles, multiple launch rocket systems and anti-aircraft missile systems as foreign and national production. In addition, the Polish leadership intends to conclude contracts for the supply of American AH-64 attack helicopters, the so-called Apache, as many as 96 units. I will not list the number of weapons in Poland. We know every unit. Tomorrow we will publish this in the Belarusian media. The total amount of funding for technical modernization programs of the Polish army until 2035 is provided in the amount of $133 billion. Do the Poles know that they will deduct up to $4,000 from each family member to strengthen their military potential? The Baltic countries are directing their main efforts to improving military infrastructure, increasing military spending, and increasing the combat strength of the national armed forces. The decision of the Lithuanian leadership to create a division-level formation in the structure of the armed forces deserves special attention. It will be based on all ground brigades and will also include tank units. With the supply of German Leopard tanks, artillery units, which will be armed with HIMARS MLRS purchased from the United States, and support units. These activities are expected to be completed by 2030. It is obvious that the territory of Poland and the Baltic countries is purposefully turning into a military springboard for its possible use by NATO. That is, they have done almost everything in order to prepare the leadership of the alliance for the decision to use military force, including all means of military force, based on the level of military danger in the region. The armed conflict on the territory of Ukraine deserves special attention. As I just said, the coalition of Western states is deliberately prolonging this conflict. Why? I have already expressed my point of view on this too. They have turned Ukraine into a drug addict, which they keep on a short leash, promising it new doses of additional weapons, including long-range weapons and financial injections. In early April, during the Brussels meeting of NATO foreign ministers, it was proposed to create a so-called mission for Ukraine with a separate budget of approximately $100 billion for 5 years. Do you feel like the Americans are shifting the financial burden onto Europe? Contributions for these needs are planned to be divided in proportion to the gross domestic product of the NATO countries. This is the deal I spoke about yesterday. In other words, this is Europe's payment for the ability to continue the confrontation with the Russian Federation, for active sabotage and terrorist activities both in the regions of Russia bordering Ukraine and in the depths of Russian territory.